Hey guys, tonight we wander into a palace that no longer exists. Only the echoes remain. You can almost hear it, the slow dripping of wax, the whisper of silk sleeves brushing against cold stone, and the faint sigh of a queen who refuses to face the mirror. Her name was Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, the woman who ruled an empire and slowly poisoned herself in the name of beauty. Imagine her there, under candlelight, her face painted ghost white, her lips the color of bruised roses. Each morning, another layer of lead, another prayer that time would forget to touch her. It's ironic, isn't it? The most powerful woman in the world, terrified of a wrinkle. Honestly, if you tried her skincare routine, you wouldn't survive it either. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment below, tell me where you're listening from, and what time it is right now in your corner of the world. I love knowing who's out there in the quiet. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Candlelight flickers across the damp, cracked walls where the spring wind slips through an old window frame. You can hear it, that faint whistle echoing through the corridor, the sound of a palace slowly fading into silence. Inside that dim chamber, Elizabeth sits still, her trembling hand resting on a table powdered white. The air smells of vinegar and dried flowers, sharp and sour like an old perfume spilled too heavily. Behind her, a maid silently dips a fine brush into a thick, milky paste, what she calls Venetian ceruse. Modern science gives it a more terrifying name: lead. You might wonder, is beauty itself a form of sacrifice? For Elizabeth, every morning was a ritual. Hours of stillness while poison settled into her skin, then a touch of mercury-tinted rouge to give her lips that deadly pink. In those days, a porcelain complexion meant nobility, while tanned skin belonged to laborers. In a world where sunlight could betray your class, you begin to understand why the Queen traded her health for an unchanging fate. Few people know that Elizabeth once suffered a near-fatal case of smallpox in 1562, which left deep scars across her face. After recovering, she began using lead powder to cover them, a small habit that soon became survival itself. And sometimes, what we call a habit is really just fear wrapped in routine. Each layer of powder was another denial of time. In her tarnished bronze mirror, Elizabeth saw not only her own face, but also the reflection of the throne behind it. In the Tudor court, a woman was forbidden to be weak or old. She knew that a single wrinkle could start the countdown of an empire. They called her the Virgin Queen, but perhaps that title was not a crown, but armor. One that kept her safe, yet made it hard to breathe. Think about it. With today's filters, foundations, and beauty apps, maybe we aren't so different from her. The only difference is that Elizabeth didn't have Instagram to adjust the lighting. She had mercury and lead instead. Not recommended, even if you're hoping for that one shade lighter overnight miracle. The palace always smelled of roses, resin, and wet velvet. Fragrances meant to hide what no one dared mention. Her breath had turned foul from rotting teeth and decaying gums. Many courtiers wrote that when the Queen spoke, one had to stand several steps away to avoid the stench. But no one said a word. That's the strange thing about power. The more terrible it becomes, the more people worship it. And in that very room, state affairs were still conducted amid the mix of perfume and poison. Elizabeth signed hundreds of decrees, her hand trembling slightly but her voice firm. Historians still debate whether her political genius was real or whether she was simply a master at hiding fear behind performance. Some believe she understood illusion perfectly. If they only see the mask, she must have thought, they'll never notice the woman trembling beneath it. Few noticed another detail. Elizabeth forbade large mirrors in her chambers. Records describe her using only small, distorted bronze mirrors, blurred enough not to reveal the cracks. Once, a maid accidentally left a bright, polished mirror in her room. The Queen flew into such a rage that everyone was terrified. "There is nothing more dreadful," she said, "than seeing yourself when you no longer believe in who that is." In modern psychology, that's what we call a fractured persona. When the image you've built for too long devours the person underneath, you start performing even when you're alone. If you've ever had to pretend to be fine while breaking inside, you understand Elizabeth I more than you think. One winter afternoon in 1602, as the cold began to fade, Elizabeth sat alone by the window, gazing at the still waters of the River Thames. Her hair had thinned so badly that she wore wigs made of horsehair, dyed bright red. They were itchy, heavy, and sometimes lice crawled out from beneath the lace. Yet she still wore them, still stood straight before the public as if death itself were just a rumor. If there were an award for commitment to image, she'd have won the Guinness World Record. Do you know the strangest thing? When Robert Dudley, the only man she ever truly loved, died, Elizabeth kept his last letter in a small box beside her bed until her own death. It's not the kind of detail royal chronicles like to mention, but her closest attendants swore that each night before sleeping, she touched that letter with trembling hands and whispered his name. A powerful queen, as lonely as a child lost in her own castle. Historians still argue about her relationship with Dudley, whether they were just soul friends or something deeper that history buried. Maybe it doesn't matter. Between love and the crown, she chose the crown, and the price was her heart. The palace grew darker with time. One night, as the candles cast their final light upon the walls, Elizabeth whispered to a maid, "I no longer feel like myself." She refused food, refused her bed, and stood for days, staring into nothing. They said she believed that if she lay down, she would never wake again. And indeed, she never did. When her body was prepared for burial, the thick makeup cracked like broken porcelain, and fluid seeped from her skin. The coffin had to be sealed tight and drenched in perfume to mask the stench of decay. Still, her funeral was magnificent, because in England, nothing is more elegant than a beautifully painted death. You might laugh, but the truth is, we still do the same. We hide our fear of aging, of ugliness, of being forgotten. Only now we use filters and hashtags instead of lead. History just changes its lipstick. The face of fear stays the same. And so the image of the Virgin Queen endures. No one remembers the scent of lead, the stench of her teeth, or the nights she cried alone. They remember the white face, the red lips, the pearls around her neck, a perfect myth, retouched again and again. She turned herself into a symbol, and symbols are not allowed to die. But maybe that's the true tragedy, because they say that on her final night, before her last breath, Elizabeth whispered, "It was all just a dream." And perhaps that was the most honest thing she ever said. For nearly half a century of rule, her life had never been real, only a painting made of poison, fear, and candlelight, before it finally went dark. You exhale softly. Outside, the wind stirs the curtains. In the dim reflection of your screen, you see your own shadow, half human, half illusion. History never truly sleeps. Sometimes it just changes its face, to remind you that every mask one day will crack. You're still sitting there, listening to the faint whistle of wind through the window, as if time itself were turning the pages of an old palace's memory. If you close your eyes, you might see her. Elizabeth, still standing there, eyes deep and distant, white powder cracked like porcelain across her skin, her thin hands trembling as they reach for a warped bronze mirror. She once believed that if she covered herself carefully enough, the world would never see the fear behind her eyes. But in truth, that painted face reflected everything she was trying to escape. Outside that room, England was changing. The empire was expanding. Ships bearing the flag of St. George crossed the oceans. But within the palace, the Queen was losing touch with the world. The counsel of her advisors no longer reached her ears, maps blurred before her fading eyes. Historians still debate those final years, whether she lost her mind from lead poisoning or simply from loneliness. Some say Elizabeth's spirit grew weary after 45 years of living as a symbol instead of a woman. The royal banquets grew fewer. In the Richmond Palace, the heavy silk gowns were still worn, but no one came to admire them. The sound of the lute filled the halls awkwardly, as though even the music feared to wake her from her dream. Each time the maids brushed her wig, lice fell like ash to the floor. She closed her eyes and pretended not to see, just as she pretended not to know that her skin was decaying beneath its white shell. Someone once asked, how could a woman as intelligent as Elizabeth not know that lead was deadly? The truth is, in the 16th century, no one really understood its poison. Yet some physicians of the time had already warned of the disease of beauty, pale skin, trembling limbs, and a mind slipping into delusion, what they called the pallor of queens. It's hard to imagine a sickness so hauntingly elegant in name. And perhaps that irony is what keeps her story alive, because beneath everything, Elizabeth was not just a woman obsessed with beauty. She was a symbol of the terror of losing perfection, a terror still pressed upon women today when appearance is worth more than truth. Have you noticed? We all have our own kind of lead powder now, invisible but just as potent. Brightened photos, forced smiles on social media, the quiet "I'm fine" whispered at midnight. Each one is a modern Venetian ceruse, less toxic to the body maybe, but just as deceitful to the soul. In her final months, Elizabeth refused to see anyone but her most trusted ladies. She sat in darkness for hours, silent, sometimes mumbling incoherent words. One servant recalled that whenever someone entered the room, she would softly ask, "Who are you?" Then whisper to herself, "A dream, I know." Perhaps it was the lead corroding her nerves, or perhaps she was simply lost between who she really was and the image the world demanded. Either way, it chills the heart to imagine. One morning, her maids found her still seated in her chair, eyes open but empty. She was gone, in the same upright posture, refusing to lie down just as she had feared. It was March of 1603. A kingdom changed hands and a legend turned to dust. Her funeral, of course, was a spectacle. Hundreds dressed in black marching through the streets to the slow beat of drums and the tolling of church bells. Her coffin was draped in black velvet, crowned with a wax effigy. Pale face, crimson lips, jeweled crown. People wept as the procession passed, believing they were saying farewell to England's goddess. None of them knew that inside, Elizabeth's body was decaying so fast it had to be re-embalmed each day. Modern scholars have re-examined the records and confirmed that descriptions of her corpse match the symptoms of chronic lead poisoning. Fragments of preserved fabric even show lead levels hundreds of times above what would be considered safe today. Yet for all science has explained, it still cannot answer the haunting question. Why would a queen so powerful willingly destroy herself to preserve a beautiful fate? Maybe that's the oldest question of all, how to not be forgotten. And Elizabeth, in the most tragic way, found her answer by becoming legend. After her death, the court painter was ordered to create her final portrait, the Virgin Queen. In it, her skin gleams like porcelain, unwrinkled, flawless. Her eyes are bright, her lips softly curved in pride. No trace of lead, no scent of rot, no truth, only a symbol. A face so perfect no one dares to ask if it's real. You smile faintly. Some lies are simply too beautiful to break, and history, like makeup, always knows how to choose just the right layer to make people believe. Art historians still argue whether that portrait was painted while Elizabeth lived or after she died. Some believe it was completed following her funeral, meaning the queen in the painting was not alive at all, but her wax effigy painted over. If that's true, then we are gazing at the face of a corpse revived through art. And if that's true, what a chilling circle. A woman who painted herself to death, then was painted again to live forever. It's hard not to shiver at the thought. A queen who lived by powder and was immortalized by paint. You shift slightly, listening to the hum of your fan, the whisper of air through the curtain. The story feels like breath itself, cool, quiet, with a faint metallic taste of memory. Perhaps, somewhere beyond the veil of time, Elizabeth still sits before her mirror, still dabbing powder on her cheeks, still wondering if anyone remembers her tonight. And you, listening now, may see a trace of yourself in her reflection, because each of us wears a mask, a layer of protection, a performance, a beauty we feel we must keep. Not everyone uses lead, but everyone fears being bare. Some say that if she could live again, Elizabeth would choose a simpler life. No throne, no white powder, no title. Just a woman watching the sunrise without fear of being seen. But history doesn't grant second chances. It writes in ink and candlelight, and when the flame dies, the story becomes shadow. And so the Virgin Queen still lingers, not in flesh, but in portraits, in records, and in your imagination right now. Outside the window, the night deepens. Rain falls in a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat from centuries away. You close your eyes and hear a whisper through the darkness. All of it was for love. And maybe that's why, even after more than 400 years, the world still remembers the woman who powdered her destiny with her own hands. Outside, the rain keeps falling, each drop tapping softly against the window frame like the patient knock of time itself. If Elizabeth lived today, she would probably be the first social media star. A queen who mastered the art of lighting, who knew exactly how to make people believe what they wanted to believe. Every time she appeared in public, she was the perfect blend of power and mystery. People didn't just look at her, they worshipped her, as if witnessing a being caught between human and myth. She didn't rule with swords or armies, but with impressions. One glance, one gesture, one faint smile. Every move was deliberate. Inside the palace, the air itself felt like a stage, and Elizabeth was its only performer. When ambassadors left her court, each carried their own version of her. Some said she was captivating, others said she was cold as marble. Yet none could claim to have truly understood her. That was her greatest triumph, making the world see everything except the woman she really was. Many have wondered why she never married. Some believe it was strategy, a way to hold absolute power. Others think she feared love because in the Tudor family, love and death were always intertwined. When you grow up knowing your mother was executed by your father, you learn that love means loss. Perhaps that's why Elizabeth never allowed herself to be soft with anyone. Power was the only wall she could lean on. Robert Dudley, the one man who ever made her hesitate, remains one of history's great enigmas. They grew up together, understood each other so deeply that words were often unnecessary. But their love, if it truly existed, was devoured by the throne itself. When Dudley's wife died under suspicious circumstances, every eye turned toward the Queen. No proof, only whispers, but enough to seal her heart forever. Maybe she did love him, but silently, and the only way such a love could survive, unseen. At night, Elizabeth sat before her mirror, speaking softly to her own reflection. Some claimed she mentioned her mother, Anne Boleyn, the woman who died for love. "I chose differently from my mother," she whispered, "but my end will be the same." No one knows if those words were ever truly spoken, but their survival through time is enough to remind us that even the most powerful woman in the world once trembled like any other. By the end, Elizabeth's body was failing. The lead had seeped into her blood, cracking her skin, shaking her hands, clouding her mind with constant pain. Yet every time she appeared in public, she stood tall, red lips, lifted chin, gaze unbroken. All of England believed their queen was immortal. No one knew that afterward she collapsed in private, gasping for breath in the dark. It was devotion taken to its final extreme, an actress who never broke character, not even as she died. One evening, her servants brought her a bed to rest on, but Elizabeth only smiled. "If I lie down," she said, "I shall never rise again." They thought she was joking, until they realized she wasn't. She remained standing for 4 days, eyes distant, hands gripping the chair. When she finally fell, the room filled with silence. No trumpets, no ceremony, only the heavy stillness of a breath that would not return. After her death, the crown passed to James VI of Scotland. The Tudor dynasty ended, and with it the age of the woman who had turned all of Europe into her stage. Yet strangely, even as the world changed, her image did not fade. People still hung portraits of the Virgin Queen in their homes. Artists kept repainting that same face, smooth, youthful, divine. No cracks, no rot, no loneliness, only legend. Some later scholars argued that the title the Virgin Queen wasn't a symbol of purity, but a masterstroke of propaganda. Elizabeth knew that in a man's world, a woman could only wield power if she belonged to no one. So she chose to belong to everyone. To England, to her people, to history itself. She would be no wife, no mother, but an emblem. And yet, if you look closely at her final writings, you can still sense her exhaustion. Her words trail off unevenly, as if written with shaking hands. Everyone wishes to see me, but no one truly sees me. Perhaps that was her only confession, from a soul that had lived too long beneath the light. He sits still, listening as the rain drifts farther away, and realize this story was never just about a queen. It's a mirror for anyone who has ever feared being forgotten, who has ever smiled through pain, who has ever painted over fear with a brave face. Elizabeth only did what we all do. The difference is she had a crown and we have a screen. Even centuries later, something about her lingers. Perhaps somewhere above the cold clouds of London, the Queen's spirit still gazes down, lips moving to that familiar phrase, "There is nothing more frightening than to be forgotten." And in that moment you understand, death doesn't truly arrive when the heart stops beating. It comes when no one remembers your name. After Elizabeth left this world, those who remained began to recreate her, quite literally. Inside the studios of royal painters, dozens of sketches were laid side by side for comparison. No artist who had seen the Queen in her final years dared to say aloud her skin was gray and cracked like broken porcelain. Instead, each brushstroke was softened, each blemish turned into a glimmer of light. They called it restoration, but in truth it was history applying makeup to itself. The posthumous portraits of Elizabeth all shared a strange similarity: a face pale as marble, a long, graceful neck, eyes calm yet resolute. The weary woman was gone, only the goddess remained. Some paintings even showed her floating among clouds, surrounded by radiant halos of gold. Common folk bowed their heads before such images, believing they were witnessing an immortal queen, never realizing that beneath those layers of paint lay the ghost of a woman who once begged for rest. They say England's collective memory never truly let Elizabeth go. During the reign of King James, her name still echoed through Shakespeare's plays, a gentle, majestic shadow hovering at the edges of the stage. In A Midsummer Night's Dream, scholars believe the fairy queen Titania was an allegory for Elizabeth, beautiful, powerful, yet imprisoned within her own magic. Critics still debate whether Shakespeare meant to praise or mock her. He was far too clever to write openly. Either way, one thing is certain: Elizabeth had transcended flesh and become archetype, a literary myth in her own right. The 17th century passed and the 18th arrived. The name Virgin Queen took on a new meaning, no longer a symbol of purity, but a sigh for loneliness. Romantic poets wrote of her as too beautiful to be loved. In London, society ladies painted their cheeks rose, powdered their faces white, fastened pearls around their necks, and called the style Elizabethan elegance. Ironically, their powders were now made of rice flour, not lead. The world had learned to imitate without killing itself. There's another curious tale few know. In 1604, a year after her death, an Italian priest visiting London wrote in his diary that he dreamed of Elizabeth. In the dream, she wore no crown, only a white nightgown, and held a mirror in her hand. When he asked if she regretted anything, the Queen replied, "I only regret that I was too busy to live." No one ever verified the dream, but the story spread as if England itself was not yet ready to let her sleep. Centuries later, scholars still argue, was Elizabeth happy in her chosen role, or was she a prisoner of her own creation? Some believe she knew exactly what she was doing, that to rule a man's world she had to become myth. Others say she was trapped, unable to escape the performance her subjects demanded. Both are right and both are wrong. Two reflections facing each other across candlelight, each showing the other's truth. Today, when you visit Westminster Abbey, her resting place, you'll find Elizabeth lying beside Mary Tudor, the sister who once imprisoned her in the Tower. Two women, two destinies once at war, now sleeping side by side in silence. There's something poetic, almost mischievous, about how history arranges its endings. Two enemies sharing the same stone vault, separated by only inches of cold marble. Perhaps time really is the greatest peacemaker of all. Visitors bow their heads before the tomb, reading the inscription carved in stone. Partners in throne and tomb, here they rest. The irony is exquisite. Elizabeth, who spent her life refusing to belong to anyone, now lies forever beside the sister who once sought her death. Gregory, anything I forgot? Elizabeth frees herself from the lady's anguish by looking. You pause for a moment, imagining that dim crypt beneath the abbey. Down there's no more lead, no more powder, only bone and dust. Yet the name Elizabeth still glows whenever it's spoken, not because of the crown, but because of the story, and stories, after all, outlive flesh. Perhaps that was what she truly wanted. No one lives forever by breath, but anyone can live forever in memory. Maybe Elizabeth never feared death. She only feared being forgotten. And in her own way, she won. As night settles over the city, you can almost hear the wind weaving through London's ancient towers, a whisper drifting through the centuries. I am still here. Not the voice of a ghost, but of memory, the kind that keeps dressing history each day with a thin new layer of paint so we can go on believing that some people never fade. You lean back, noticing your heartbeat slowing, your breath evening out. In the dim room where you sit, the glow of your screen reflects your face, half real, half illusion, half present, half ancient. Perhaps someone, 400 years ago, looked into a mirror and asked the same question. Am I still myself? Outside, the rain has stopped. The city glows again. But somewhere beneath Westminster's stone floor, a spirit may still be smiling. Not because she was forgiven, but because at last she knows she was never forgotten. Beneath the ancient oaks of Richmond Park, once the Queen's private hunting ground, people still whisper of nights when a pale moon hangs low and a woman's figure appears through the mist, a long cloak brushing the grass, her hair glowing like candlelight, her steps silent. Locals call her the White Lady, but those who know history understand it could be none other than Elizabeth. Not a ghost, but a memory, a remnant of an age that refuses to fade. For sometimes, those who lived too fiercely leave imprints deeper than anything they ever possessed. That place is now a public park. Children ride bicycles. People walk their dogs. They don't notice when the wind suddenly stops, when moonlight glides across the lake and a faint reflection appears. A woman leaning toward her own image in the water. The surface trembles, then stills. Everything vanishes as though it never was. Yet some say if you stand there long enough, completely still, you'll catch a faint trace in the air. Not of grass or flowers, but of something sharper, sweeter. The scent of lead and rosewater. The fragrance that once perfumed an entire kingdom. History, even when closed, never really leaves the places it once breathed. During the Victorian era, historians excavating the old palace grounds found small ceramic jars buried beneath the stone floors. Inside was hardened white powder, stuck to the walls like ash. Tests revealed an alarmingly high concentration of lead, enough that simply opening a jar could have poisoned the air. One researcher wrote in his journal, "Perhaps these are the last drops of beauty turned to stone." The deeper scholars studied her, the clearer it became. Elizabeth ruled not only through politics, but through psychology. She built a collective belief that England existed because of her. And, in some mysterious way, her people believed it. She became the nation's spirit, a genius strategy, but also a life sentence. Because once you become the soul of a country, you are no longer allowed to be a person. The modern world looks back and still finds something familiar in her story. Do you see it too? Society still demands that women be perfect, beautiful, strong, tireless, eternal. We've only traded the throne for an office chair, the crown for a glowing screen. But it's the same performance. People still praise a queen when she shows no cracks, and fall silent when she breaks. Elizabeth didn't grow old alone. She merely grew old before the rest of humanity. Modern psychologists have compared the Queen to Carl Jung's concept of the persona, the mask one wears to be accepted by society. Elizabeth turned that mask into an empire. She understood that true power isn't about who you are, but about who others believe you are. Perhaps that's what makes her both admirable and tragic. She mastered illusion so completely that it consumed her. There are so many such titles she so often used, so cleverly, so quickly, so smartly. In the 19th century, as the first feminist movements rose in Britain, Elizabeth became a symbol of independence. Yet the irony is cruel. Those women shouting her name as their rallying cry rarely knew of the fear that had haunted her each night. To them, she was the queen of power. To history, she was the queen of illusion. Both titles endure, and neither is wrong. An article from 1890 once wrote, "Elizabeth was not a woman. She was England itself," a line both reverent and fatal, because in saying so, it erased the woman behind the light. No one remembered that beneath the glory of a nation was a restless soul that never slept. They built statues of her across the country, in front of town halls, in public squares, on coins. Each face was slightly different, but all shared that same expression. Half smile, half challenge, a look that seems to ask, "Are you sure you truly know me?" No one can answer, and perhaps that's why she still lingers. Because what is never fully understood can never be buried. Her story traveled far beyond England. In the colonies, Elizabeth's image appeared on the first silver coins, a symbol of authority and order, even though her life had been defined by inner chaos. When those coins reached India, Africa, and the Americas, her pale face, long neck, and steady eyes became the face of Western power. A face once created to hide fear, now stood for empire. The world, it seems, has a dark sense of humor when it comes to history. Post-colonial scholars later pointed out the irony. They wrote, "Elizabeth once feared being truly seen, and then the world used her face to see itself. You can't help but smile." The words are both true and bitter. Perhaps that's why her story still reaches us today. It isn't the tragedy or the politics that stay with you. It's something profoundly human. The obsession with image. Elizabeth was a magnified reflection of us all. Those who keep retouching, editing, seeking the perfect light, longing to be loved without being truly seen. And if you look closely, every era has its own Elizabeth. Maybe a celebrity, a politician, or even someone you know who keeps posting flawless photos in the middle of the night. They're all playing the same game, repainting themselves until nothing real remains. As the night deepens, you realize this story isn't history anymore. It's a mirror held quietly to your own soul. The room is silent. save for the steady hum of the fan, and in that hush, you almost hear a voice, not the narrator's, but your own, whispering, "Are we really any different from her?" No one answers, because maybe that question doesn't need an answer. It only needs to be heard. Moonlight still spreads across the lake at Richmond, smooth and pale like a giant mirror. You look into it, see the silver ripples, the drifting clouds, and somewhere, faintly, a blurred face shimmering through the mist. You can't tell if it's imagination or memory reflecting itself. Perhaps history doesn't live in books at all, but in quieter things, in mist, in water, in memories that refuse to fall asleep. Sometimes you wonder, was Elizabeth ever happy? Not the kind of happiness that comes with a crown, but the simple joy of being human. Walking barefoot through wet grass, laughing at something foolish, crying without fear of being seen. Probably not. Even her smile was a political ritual, measured to the millimeter before anyone could see it, a smile gilded and imprisoned by ceremony. They say that in her final years Elizabeth confessed to a courtier that she no longer knew where acting ended and truth began. Each time she looked into the mirror, she saw another woman staring back. Not a monster, not a goddess, just a weary figure. "Perhaps I have lived too long in the light," she murmured. The line was never officially recorded, yet many historians believe she could have said it because no one can perform forever without fading into their own illusion. The 21st century may seem far away, but that feeling hasn't left us. You know what I mean. We too live in the light for too long. Only now the light comes from a screen. Each time we edit a photo or post a perfect caption, we add another layer of powder, whiter, smoother, more distant. And, like Elizabeth, we begin to forget what our real face looked like. If she lived in our time, she'd probably master social media faster than anyone else. Old storytellers said that after death, Elizabeth's spirit wandered the stone corridors, refusing heaven, unwilling to enter hell. She simply drifted through the empty halls, touching the walls where mirrors once hung. Each time she looked into one, she saw nothing but darkness. Some called it punishment, to exist forever in a world without reflection. But perhaps it was her only release, the one place she no longer had to perform. Modern scholars often use the phrase, the invention of the self. They argue that Elizabeth was the first in Western history to understand that identity could be constructed through image. She wasn't just the first queen to rule an empire, she was the first person to build a personal brand before the world even had a word for it. From her shimmering white gowns to her golden wigs, every detail was designed to deliver a message. I am purity, and I am power. Art critics still debate whether that was genius or self-destruction, but through human eyes, perhaps it was both. Genius, because she understood that power is theater. Self-destruction, because she forgot how to step off the stage. One old diary, written by a lady-in-waiting, describes a haunting scene. One morning, before the previous day's makeup had been washed away, Elizabeth noticed red patches on her hands. "What is this?" she asked. The maid trembled and answered, "Your Majesty, it's your real skin." Elizabeth stayed silent for a long time, then whispered, "Real skin should not appear." The reply was absurd and heartbreaking. If our brain in her world, the real was forbidden. Every day. Think about it. How many times have we said the same things to ourselves? Don't be weak. Don't be ugly. Don't speak the truth. We may not use lead, but we still hide our real skin every day. Perhaps Elizabeth was simply the most honest version of all of us. She never hid the fact that she had to paint herself just to exist. Do you remember the story of the last mirror? After her death, her attendants found it turned face down, the glass dark and cloudy like ash. They said that in dim light, if anyone dared to lift it and look, they wouldn't see their own reflection, but the pale face of a woman staring back, lips slightly parted, as if about to speak. No one knows if that's true, but the mirror remains locked in the royal archives, unlabeled, unseen. Perhaps they fear that if it were uncovered, her story would begin again. And in a way, it already has. In every film, every painting, every video you watch, Elizabeth lives each time someone looks into a mirror and asks, "Who am I?" She's no longer flesh and bone, but symbol. A symbol that has outgrown history and entered the human psyche. You sit still, hearing the soft wind outside the window, and realize something. Maybe the Queen didn't die from lead. Maybe she died from silence. The silence of a world that never dared to tell her she was already enough. Beautiful enough. Human enough. Real enough to be loved. Perhaps if just one person in that entire court had said those words, history might have changed. But no one did, because everyone was afraid. And that fear, even after 4 centuries, still wears the same face. The night air feels thick, the moonlight spreading softly through the curtains, falling across the damp walls like an old fabric still breathing. You're still sitting there, listening as Elizabeth's story drifts by like smoke. And for a strange moment, you're no longer sure if this is really her story or your own. There's something in the way she lived, between fear, loneliness, and endless masks, that makes you realize we're still doing the same thing, only with more sophisticated tools. They called her the Virgin Queen, but perhaps her true title should have been the Mirror Queen, the Queen of Reflections. Her entire life revolved around them, reflections of herself, of her people, of what they wanted to believe. She didn't just rule a nation, she ruled perception. And so, her kingdom existed not only through laws but through faith in illusion. Modern psychology often talks about the architecture of the self, how we build the fragile house of our identity from bricks named memory, praise, and approval. Elizabeth, through genius or cruel destiny, understood this 4 centuries ago. She knew that to rule, she had to become the mirror that reflected the power others longed to see. And when you live too long as a mirror, you slowly disappear behind your own reflection. Scholars still puzzle over why Elizabeth grew so afraid of mirrors in her final years. Some say it was madness caused by lead poisoning, others the melancholy of age. But if you look deeper, the reason might be simpler. She could no longer bear to see the woman that history had no place for. You felt that, haven't you? Those mornings when you look in the mirror and see someone staring back. No longer who you were, not yet who you want to be, just a stranger you still have to greet. Elizabeth's death was more than the end of a dynasty. It marked the end of an age that believed beauty could defeat truth. After her, England entered the century of reason, science, revolution. Yet paradoxically, the modern world only turned back toward the mirror. We no longer gaze into silvered glass or still water. We stare into blue screens, and the images there, like the portraits she once admired, are brilliant, flawless, and entirely false. Postmodern philosophers once wrote, "In the age of images, beauty is no longer a goal, it is a religion." In some strange way, Elizabeth was its first prophet. She understood that humans would always worship appearances, even as those appearances destroyed them. Maybe when she spread that fatal powder across her skin, she wasn't just chasing youth. She was declaring, "I will be immortal, even if I must die to achieve it." Some historians disagree. They say Elizabeth was merely a victim of her time, trapped in an image she couldn't escape. But perhaps they're wrong. No illusion lasts 40 years without the soul's consent. She knew the cost. She chose to pay it. A little-known Oxford archive tells of one incident. A young attendant accidentally spilled her powder jar. Instead of rage, Elizabeth simply stared at the dust scattered across the floor and whispered, "Strange. This thing makes you beautiful and makes you disappear." The servant later left court, joined a convent, and repeated the story in her old age. Historians still debate its truth, but it sounds so right that no one wants to doubt it. Because that wasn't the voice of a monarch, it was the voice of someone who understood the essence of illusion. In the hush of night, you can almost see her standing before the mirror, brush in hand, applying one layer after another. With every stroke, she adds a lie, a fear, a dream, until even she no longer knows where she ends and the image begins. When the final layer is done, she smiles. The perfect, frozen smile of someone who has traded her soul for symbolism. But what happens when the symbol begins to crack? A night during her final winter, attendants heard muffled sobs from the Queen's chamber. Not loud cries, but gasping breaths, as if someone were trying to swallow their tears. They were too frightened to enter. The next morning, she appeared as usual. White powder, red lips, regal composure. No one asked what had happened. Yet from that day on, she never allowed anyone to wash her face again. "No one shall see me without the powder," she said. A sentence cold enough to chill the blood. Perhaps she wasn't afraid of others seeing her face. She feared seeing it herself. People still debate. Did she know her cosmetics were killing her? Perhaps. Or perhaps she simply stopped caring. To die for beauty, for Elizabeth, wasn't failure, it was destiny. That death, paradoxically, completed her story perfectly. The queen who painted herself out of existence. She once said, "I will not be a mother, but I will give birth to an age." And she did. After her death, Europe still spoke her name, not as a person, but as a period. Elizabethan became an era, not an identity. Who else in history can say that? Yet strip away the golden glass and the story returns to something heartbreakingly simple. A woman who loved, who lost, who feared, who wanted to be remembered. A human being. Nothing more, nothing less. He smiled faintly. How strange that some people are so great, we forget they once trembled. And when we remember, they suddenly feel closer, more real, as though they're sitting beside us in the dark. The story doesn't end when the queen dies. What she left behind wasn't just a throne, but a mirror of human fear. Fear of being seen, fear of not being loved, fear of disappearing. And the world, 400 years later, is still playing the same game. Think about it. We may no longer use lead, but we poison ourselves in subtler ways. Comparison, perfectionism, the exhaustion of always trying to appear unbroken. We still measure ourselves through others' eyes, and when the reflection fades, we panic. Are we really so different from her? Perhaps that's why whenever her name is spoken, people don't just see a queen, they see themselves. She isn't the ghost in the mirror, she is the mirror. And everyone who looks sees a fragment of their own face in hers. Maybe, if Elizabeth's spirit still wanders somewhere, she's smiling to hear this. because her greatest fear, to be forgotten, never came true. And yet, the irony remains. She's remembered not for her power, but for the vulnerability she tried to hide. "We have two options," began Foy. Elizabeth said, "Silently." The coward smiled, but for the vulnerability she tried to hide. The night continues. A distant clock strikes 12. Moonlight floods the room, shimmering across the floor like candlelight in an old palace, and you imagine her there, standing within that pale glow, calm now, her eyes free of fear, carrying only the quiet serenity of someone who has finally finished her role. And then it hits you. This story isn't old at all. It repeats every day. Every time someone pretends to be strong while breaking inside. Every time we hide sadness behind a practiced smile. Every time we repaint ourselves for others to see. Elizabeth was only the first chapter of that tragedy. And we are the next. Somewhere in the night breeze you can almost hear a whisper. All the powder will one day fade. But a soul, if it dares to be honest, will remain. And perhaps that was the final lesson the Queen learned, the moment the last light in her palace went out. Inside that stillness, it almost feels as if the story has finally come to an end. But no, history has never known how to stop at the right moment. It always takes one more step, turns back, and smiles with that ironic glint, as if to whisper, "There's one more thing you've forgotten." After Elizabeth's death, her successors did what every new dynasty eventually does. They began rewriting the memory of the old one. King James I didn't want to live in her shadow, so he slowly let her image fade from ceremonies and courtly rituals. Yet, in a twist of irony, the harder England tried to forget, the more it remembered. People hadn't loved Elizabeth for her power, but for her story, the story of a woman who dared to turn her own fear into a weapon, powerful enough to silence an entire world. Poets of her time, like John Donne and Ben Jonson, began writing about her as something sacred. In their verses, Elizabeth was no longer a woman of flesh and blood. She became the spirit of spring, of light, of eternal England. But if you read between the lines, you'll sense a gentle irony there too. They knew that behind that radiance was a darkness full of cracks. Some even hinted that the Queen's beauty was born of poison, though they wrapped it in metaphor, because speaking such truth openly back then could mean death. And so Elizabeth became a double-sided figure, half goddess, half warning. In the new statues and frescoes raised in her honor, her face was carved with such precision that people forgot the fissures, the smell of lead, the sleepless eyes. They remembered only the ivory woman, proud, rigid, untouchable, a statue that seemed to breathe. But if you look closer, you realize even that image was just another mask, a new layer of powder the world kept applying to her, as if death itself couldn't stop humanity from putting makeup on the Queen. As the centuries passed, her story was told and retold, each era reinventing her in its own image. To the Enlightenment, she was proof of intellect and reason. To the Romantics, the ghost of tragic beauty. To the Victorians, a moral ideal. To the modern world, a symbol of female power. Every generation found in her exactly what it needed to believe. And that, perhaps, is the secret of great symbols. They never truly belong to anyone. Do you see it now? History treats people like mirrors layered over one another. The first layer is truth, the second, myth, And the final layer, the one where everything dissolves, is us, the ones doing the looking. Elizabeth is simply the reflection through time. What we see in her depends entirely on who's standing in front of the glass. There's a lesser-known story from the 19th century. When archaeologists restored Westminster Abbey, they found an old cracked mirror among the royal relics. No one could prove it had belonged to Elizabeth, but rumors spread faster than any official report. People said the crack appeared on the very day a new statue of the Queen was unveiled at Buckingham Palace. Scientists dismissed it, of course, but that night guards swore they heard faint laughter echoing through the halls. Not joyful laughter, but the kind that comes from someone who's already seen through every lie. The more you read, the clearer it becomes that Elizabeth's story didn't stop in the 16th century. It seeped into every culture, every fear. Wherever a woman has to pretend to be strong, there's Elizabeth. Wherever someone hides exhaustion behind an invisible layer of powder, there she is. Even when you stand before your mirror each morning, fixing your hair, straightening your posture, forcing calm before the world, some small part of her smiles through you, not mockingly but knowingly. You remember the story of Robert Dudley's letter, don't you? They say that after the Queen's death, it was found beside her pillow, edges dusted with white powder. The writing trembled, but the last lines were still legible. My most dear, though time and fear divide us, I remain yours until my breath ends. When the new king was handed the letter, he skimmed it and set it aside. But the people never forgot. The letter became a symbol of the love that could never be named, a love buried under lead and power. A replica of that letter now rests in the British Museum, sealed behind glass beside a small jar of Elizabethan face powder. The two sit together, silent as an old married couple. Visitors take photos, read the placard, and move on. Yet sometimes, on quiet nights, the curators say the glass fogs up from within, though the temperature never changes. They joke, maybe someone's still breathing in there, and you know jokes like that often carry more truth than people think. The story of the Queen refuses to end, because it isn't just history, it's an endless reflection. Each generation looks into that mirror and sees something different. Modern women see strength. Psychologists see the tragedy of identity. Artists see a haunted, shimmering soul, both luminous and dissolving at once. All of them are right. And you, listening now, what do you see? Maybe only the soft rain outside your window and that faint ache in your chest when you realize you too have lived half your life wearing an invisible mask. Maybe you've feared the light, or longed to be loved without being fully seen. If so, you and the Queen are not 4 centuries apart. You're separated by only one fogged mirror. As the night thins toward dawn, you imagine the old palace at the first light after Elizabeth's death. No trumpet, no wailing, only the scent of burnt wax and wilted flowers on cold stone. A few young maids still stand there, hands trembling, eyes red. They're not just mourning their queen, they're mourning their own youth, shackled by ritual, by powder, by rules that never made sense. One of them later wrote, "We painted the Queen every morning, but in truth, she was painting us." Perhaps that's the truest thing ever said about Elizabeth. A woman who created her own world and was destroyed by it. Centuries later, all that remains is this voice, soft, distant, drifting through the dark like a final breath. And just when you think the story has fallen silent, something stirs inside you. A whisper, or perhaps a warning, because Elizabeth is still here, in every glance, every gesture of self-correction, every belief that if we were only a little more beautiful, a little more perfect, we might finally be loved. That's why she's immortal. Not in textbooks, but in the way humanity keeps repeating her fear. He smiled faintly, unsure whether it's out of pity or realization. 400 years have passed. The world has changed. Technology has changed. But the human heart, it's still the same. Still afraid of not being enough. Still desperate to be seen. Still unsure how to live without performing. Examen alien. Maybe that's Elizabeth's real legacy. Not her throne, not her empire, but the quiet truth that when a person lives too long inside an illusion, that illusion continues to live after they're gone. And tonight, as you turn off the light, perhaps somewhere in the faint glow of your darkened screen, a pale figure tilts her head, watching you through the glass, smiling, neither sad nor pleased, as if to say, "I was once you." What is he doing? At dawn, a blanket of fog draped over London like a sheet of silver, soft and heavy, cloaking the city in silence. From afar, the tower of Westminster looked like a faint ghost, half sacred, half cold. You can almost hear footsteps echoing down the stone corridors, slow, regal, deliberate, carrying the sound of a time long gone. They're not the footsteps of tourists, but of history itself, still pacing through corners no one can see, through spaces untouched by electric light. Some say that on the densest fog mornings, a pale figure in a white gown can be seen standing motionless in the courtyard of the Abbey, facing the wall. She doesn't move, she doesn't speak, and when anyone tries to approach, her form melts into the fog, leaving behind only a faint fragrance, not quite jasmine, not quite rose vinegar, something sweet and acrid, like the trace of the very cosmetics that once poisoned an entire dynasty. In the 19th century, spiritualists had a name for it, the phenomenon of residual memory. They believed that when a person lived with great intensity, their energy imprinted itself onto the air around them, that certain places could hold onto human breath, the way wrinkles hold the memory of a smile. If that's true, then Elizabeth never left. She merely moved to another layer of time, where sighs still linger, where mirrors still reflect even without anyone to look into them. There's a story about a young scholar from Cambridge, a woman who dedicated her life to studying Elizabeth. She was once granted permission to touch a ring the Queen had worn until her death, a rare piece she never took off. Inside the ring, hidden beneath the dull gold, were two miniature engravings, one of Elizabeth herself and the other of her mother, Anne Boleyn, two faces carved side by side, eternally bound. The scholar said she felt her hands tremble, not from fear, but from the sense of touching something ancestral. Two women, two generations, bound in the same circle of fate. One died for love, the other survived by renouncing it. Both vanished, yet the legend endures. They say Elizabeth understood the true cost of existence, and she paid it in full. She lost her youth, her body, her freedom, but in exchange she gained the only power humans ever truly crave, to be remembered. Perhaps that's the philosopher's stone the alchemist spoke of, not the power to turn metal into gold, but to turn fear into eternity. Now, 4 centuries later, her story isn't just written in history books, it's become a language. When someone says queen, they don't just think of a crown, they think of that cold gaze, that straight posture, that white face, that silence. Elizabeth taught the world, without meaning to, that power doesn't need to shout, it only needs to be believed. Modern film critics have noticed something strange about every actress who's ever played her. None of them truly becomes Elizabeth. Kate Blanchett, Glenda Jackson, Bette Davis, each one portrayed a different woman, one conflicted, one melancholy, one fierce, one sensual. And maybe that's the most honest tribute of all, to let every generation create its own version of her. Because no single face can contain the entire story. A French filmmaker once said, "Elizabeth is not a character, she's a phenomenon, an allegory for every woman's fear of choosing between power and love." It sounds poetic, but if you think about it, it's painfully true. In recent years, psychoanalysts have used Elizabeth's image to describe what they call the cost of the perfect persona. When a person becomes consumed by their own image, one of them even coined the term the Elizabeth effect. The harder you try to control how others see you, the more you lose yourself. It's a loop humanity still hasn't escaped, even after centuries. I once read a letter from a young British woman published in a history magazine. She wrote that whenever she felt lost, she would visit Elizabeth's statue at Hatfield House. She'd sit on the stone steps beneath that proud, cold face and laugh. She had no idea that in this world we're still wearing masks just like hers. Ours are cheaper though, and easier to replace. The last line of her letter read, "Maybe she'd understand." You finish reading and feel something stir, a quiet ache of empathy. You feel for Elizabeth, for that young woman, for everyone who's ever hurt themselves just to be seen differently by the world. Sometimes, on silent nights, you can't help but wonder, if the Queen's spirit could see our world now, what would she think? Maybe she'd laugh softly, the kind of laugh only those who have mastered the illusions of power can make. She'd see millions of people staring into glowing screens, counting likes, perfecting angles, and she'd realize they've all become her. But she wouldn't mock us. She wouldn't even scold. She'd simply stand there, silent as she always did, watching, not interfering. Because she knows each of us must find our own limits. Across the river of time, perhaps Elizabeth has learned that beauty never killed anyone. It was the denial of one's true self that poisoned everything. And when you look into the mirror and smile, really smile, maybe you're doing what she never could, forgiving instead of hiding. Seen this way, history isn't a collection of dry facts, but a conversation between souls. Each generation looks into the mirror, sees a new face, and calls it the past. But really, it's just themselves reflected through the light of time. You take a slow breath. The air smells damp, earthy, alive with the scent of the unseen. The story lingers, quietly, patiently, like mist spreading across the surface of a lake. And if you listen closely enough, you might hear her whisper through the wind, "I was afraid too much, but you don't have to be." And perhaps that is Elizabeth's final legacy, not a throne, not a symbol, but a message to anyone still living beneath the light of 1,000 tiny mirrors. Don't let the reflection become your prison. Is in the end, when all the lights go out and the powder fades, only what is real remains. And what is real, though small, though imperfect, is the only part of us that survives the centuries. Elizabeth never knew that while she was alive, but you do. And maybe that's enough for her to finally be free. As the story begins to close, the room around you seems to quiet with it. The wind outside the window still hums softly, distant, like the breath of another century. You realize you've walked beside Elizabeth through a long journey, from the candlelight of the Tudor court to the pale blue glow of the screen before you now. A journey through power, through beauty, through fear, and finally, through what it means to be human. She was once the trembling child imprisoned in a tower, the woman forced to choose between love and the crown, the queen who powdered her face until even her soul turned white. But above all, she was a mirror for humanity itself, for anyone who has ever tried to be perfect, ever hidden their cracks, ever feared what they might see when the world falls silent and they are left alone with their reflection. Elizabeth never truly disappeared. She only dissolved into the mist of memory, so that each of us, when we face a mirror, might find a fragment of her there. A trace of the fear of being forgotten, a spark of the longing to be loved, even in imperfection, a shadow of the beauty that both redeems and destroys. And if there is one thing the Queen would whisper to us across the centuries, it would likely be something simple. Live as yourself before you too become just a legend in someone else's eyes. You exhale, your heartbeat slowing. This story, which seemed to be about a queen who died 400 years ago, is in truth a mirror of the present, a reflection of how we still powder our egos, still hide our truths, still hope to be seen beyond the glow of curated light. Outside, the moonlight has faded. The fog begins to lift. Somewhere, the church bells of London toll, round and warm, like time itself saying goodbye. Perhaps Elizabeth has finally found her rest, and you, sitting here in the gentle dark, deserve rest too, even if only for a few small, quiet moments amid the noise of life. Let this voice drift away with the night. Let every vivid image, every fear, every unsaid word fade with the hum of the fan and the whisper of the wind. And if, in your dreams tonight, you see a woman in white smiling softly, don't be afraid. She's only come to remind you, no more layers are needed. You are already enough. Now, close your eyes. Sleep well wherever you are in the world. And until next time, we'll meet again in another story from Midnight's Echoes.